Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be talking about the triumphant return of Harlequins in competitive play. And I'm not just talking about the odd Death Jester or Solitaire plugged into somebody's list. I'm talking about a full-blown Harlequin-themed army. And I'm really not clowning around with you guys on this one. A fully themed Harlequin army recently won a grand tournament. And a lot of you guys are going to hear this and you're probably going to discount it and say it's a one-off, right? This is obviously an example of lucky matchups or just an insanely skilled player, maybe going against people that are less experienced than him. But I can tell you just by looking at the list that won the event and through my own experiences running a Harlequin army in 10th edition, that this is not going to be a one-off and we are going to see Harlequins more in competitive play going forward, especially after January. So without further ado, let us go ahead and jump right into this video. So in this video, we are going to be taking a look at the tournament itself, where it took place, how many players, how many rounds, etc. We're going to be doing a review and analysis of the winning Harlequin list. And lastly, we're going to answer the question, does this mean Harlequins are back competitively? So the tournament itself was the Winter Waaagh 2023. It had 49 players over 5 rounds in Harwich, England on December 9th, and Eldar took first and second in this event, with the winning list being almost pure Harlequins. So it was basically a pure Quinn list, and the runner-up was kind of a Court of the Young King and Friends list. Really hard to describe, but just imagine pretty much an all-character list, and that's pretty much what it was. I won't really be doing a review of it now, but if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments and I can definitely look at it in the future. It was a pretty big tournament. I know 49 players doesn't seem big, but in person, if you guys have ever been to these kind of events, 49 players is still a pretty big tournament. It's not the biggest, but it's sizable. And there was some fierce competition at this event, with some pretty powerful lists as well. So of course, just like every big event, there's going to be players bringing their best and bringing the ultimate, meta armies. And yes, to be quite frank with you guys, I do find it a little bit ironic that the two winning lists were the complete opposite of the meta, but maybe that in and of itself speaks volumes about how versatile the Aeldari Codex really is right now, and how truly deep it is. There's so many different ways to play the Aeldari in 10th edition, which I really enjoy. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the winning list of the event. Now, the winning list was a Harlequins list by Mike Porter. So first of all, congratulations to Mike. Awesome job on the win. You did it with a very unconventional build. Now, let's go ahead and take an overview of what was in the list. So there was a Death Jester, Fuegan, Illic, and 2 Troop Masters for characters. As far as his battle line, he had 6 troops, so 6 units of 5, with of course 2 fusion pistols in there, and as many Harlequin's Kisses as you can fit. He had 3 Shroud Runners, 5 Warp Spiders, 3 Void Weavers, 2 Sky Weavers, and 6 Star Weavers to transport those troops. Now, I do want to address a little bit of an elephant in the room here, because some of you are looking at this list and saying, Proxy Hammer, this is not a full Quinn list. There are other units in this. I mean, for God's sakes, he has Fuegan in there, Illic Night Spear, Shroud Runners, and Warp Spiders. This is not a pure Harlequin list by any means. And yes, that is true. It's not a pure Harlequin list, right? And that's just simply due to the fact that pure Harlequins, as of now, lack several tools needed to be competitive. So if you're running pure Harlequins, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually win tournaments because of your ability to score on certain secondaries and perform certain battlefield roles unless you are super ahead. So in a high stakes tournament like this, that is going to be rare. It's going to be a rare thing for you to be so much ahead, especially if you're, winning your games and to begin with, you're getting paired against better and better players. That's often just not going to happen, so you do need units that can complement your army. And that's exactly what Mike did, right? He took the Harlequins, he played to their strengths, but also recognized that they had their weaknesses and had to plug those weaknesses accordingly. So let's go ahead and take a deep dive into the list itself and analyze each and every unit and its place in the list. Starting with the characters, we have the Death Jester with the Fate's Messenger enhancement. Now, a lot of you guys might look at this and say, well, Death Jester, there's so many shuriken cannons in this list already, so many Star Weavers, why do we need more anti-infantry? And the key to the Death Jester isn't its anti-infantry punching power, but its adaptability. The Death Jester is an extremely effective assassin of low toughness characters. So things like the Dark Commune or Imperial Guard command squads within larger units, it's very effective at killing them. Because you have Fate's Messenger, you have devastating wounds, and you can get precision attacks, which makes it more than capable of killing those lesser characters. Now, this is really important because the rest of the list kind of hinges on its ability to kill units in combat. Units like the Dark Commune or other things that have characters that buff the survivability of units are absolutely the bane of this list. So to make sure that your shooting can be as deadly and efficient as possible, those characters need to go. And of course, like I said before, the Death Jester can definitely deliver that. Fuegan is also in the list. This list also kind of lacks heavy anti-large punch, and it also lacks something that can stick on an objective. So, there is no Phoenix Gem in this list, for example. Fuegan is essentially a Phoenix Gem. If you need to put this guy in the middle of the board to control it, to force your enemy to you, then you have a tool for that, right? Because Fuegan, of course, can revive. But he's also a great hunter of large targets, which the Harlequins also need a little bit of extra help with. So Fuegan fills two roles, right? He can be sticky when he needs to be, but he can also be very highly damaging, and he can be a good deterrent to opponents who have heavier vehicles that want to move up the board. Illic Nightspear is also in this list, and Illic Nightspear is just essentially a lone operative that is probably going to play an assassination type role or just be in the back guarding an objective on the home field. Remember, this list does not have an Autarch Way Leaper in it, so, there's really nothing that can just afford to sit in the back out of line of sight. Illic is that option, right? Because especially in this type of list, you're going to need the Death Jester to be doing stuff. You can't afford to have it just sitting out of line of sight in the backfield, babysitting your home objective all game. To wrap up the characters, we have two Troop Masters. So basically, these just are to give a few units devastating wounds, right? It's not in every unit, but a few units will be able to hit harder. And Troop Masters, they don't hit super hard, but they're pretty cheap. They're only 55 points, and you need at least one of them to be your Warlord so that you can take up to 6 troops in your list. And they are also armed with fusion pistols, so they can actually do some decent damage against lighter large targets. As for the battle line, we do have 6 troops, like I stated before. They're essentially armed with everything you can take, except for the Neuro Disruptors. And I have to say, I'm not really sure why. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. I feel like, why not put a Neuro Disruptor in the unit? But, maybe you just can't. Or maybe, Mike was just looking for a little bit of extra AP on his pistols so that he could force a few more wounds through. And again, we have 2 more troops armed with exactly the same thing. Note that the lead player has the Aeldari Power Sword instead of the Harlequin special weapon, and that's simply due to the fact that the Power Sword is actually a little bit stronger now. And once again, we have the same thing. We have 2 units of troops with the fusion pistols and the Power Sword on the troop leader. Now, one thing I will mention about troops is that a lot of players kind of back off of them because striking scorpions are, in most cases, a better choice, right? They can infiltrate, so they don't need to spend the points for a transport. They have devastating wounds base against infantry, and, they also have sustained hits 1. All that for the same cost as a troop. But here's the thing, troops do get +1 to wound when they go in. They also have fusion pistols, and they have a 4+ invul save, so they are a little bit better against higher AP weapons. And we exist in a meta right now where there's a lot of Space Marines with plasma out there. And of course, Meltaguns and other high AP, high-strength weaponry that is designed to kill large targets are going to be much less effective against the Quins. And not for nothing, but when moving out of a Star Weaver, Harlequins have a surprisingly long threat range. They move 8, they can get out 3 inches from a Star Weaver, and they can charge 2d6. Especially with a Fate dice, you can pretty much ensure that you can get quite a few charges off in a single turn. And if you couple that with the next part of the list, which is the Star Weavers, and again, Mike brought 6 of them, you start to get a picture of how this list operates. So essentially, for those of you guys who don't know, a Starweaver is kind of like a Venom, except with 2 shuriken cannons instead of 2 splinter cannons. And it basically kind of does the same thing. Units can hop back in it at the end of your turn. So if a Harlequin unit kills an enemy unit and then has nothing else to do but sit there and get shot at, instead it can hop right back into the Starweaver and be a little bit safer from enemy shooting. It is also open-topped. It has firing deck 6, so that means that Harlequins can shoot their fusion pistols out of it. Not going to come up that much, but it can be useful if you don't really want to commit your Harlequins and still want to get a few extra shots off at an enemy unit. So it does give you a little bit of options and a little bit of versatility. The other thing is the Starweaver is actually a really cost-effective vehicle. Shuriken cannons, especially when combined with the support elements of this army, are very effective at taking out not only heavy infantry, but harder targets as well because of the next unit that I'm going to be talking about, which is the Shroud Runners, right? Giving all of these Starweavers lethal hits against an enemy unit can really start to add up, and it can kind of cover the weakness of this list, which is it doesn't have a lot of Bright Lances, right? Actually, I don't think there's a single Bright Lance in this list, so there's not a lot of heavy, hardcore anti-large weapons outside of Fuegan. So you do need something to deal with large opponents, vehicles, and monsters. So just having this many shuriken cannons with lethal hits is a good way to deal with those, large targets that may normally be harder to pick up with anti-infantry weapons. And also, I think this goes without saying, but shuriken cannons are just good against infantry, right? So if you can pick up all the infantry in your opponent's list very quickly, your opponent is going to have to do cartwheels to try to get secondary objectives. Right? If your opponent has high-pointed, expensive models doing secondaries, they're not going to be efficiently killing your units. Especially when you have an army-wide 4+ invul, which is the other thing about this list, right? That a lot of people might pick up on right away is that there's a lot of 4+ invuls in this army, and it is deceptively tough against single-shot, high-strength weapons. Especially with fate dice. So, shooting a last cannon at one of these, first of all, doesn't have a high chance of actually killing it with one shot, right? You would need to roll a 5 or a 6 to one-shot it, and that's after you fail your invul save. And, that's also considering that you don't use a fate dice, right? Because, of course, being Eldar, we can use Strands of Fate on Harlequin Skyweavers as well. So these are only 80 points, but they're actually very tough. And it's one of the key differences between the Starweaver and the Venom, which makes the Starweaver, in my opinion, much more effective in competitive play, is that it has that tough 4+ invul combined with Strands of Fate. And the Venom just doesn't, right? The Venom is great, don't get me wrong. The Venom is an excellent unit. But, it is more fragile, and typically, even if you, spam them, by the end of the game, most of them are probably going to be dead if you don't use them carefully. So yeah, having basically 30 troops on the battlefield with 4+ invul saves and then, 6 Starweavers on top of that with 4+ invul saves is a lot of target saturation. It's more than a lot of opponents can deal with, especially since the nerfs to towering. So I'm going to tell you guys, just from my own experience, I ran a Harlequin army for, 3 or so weeks, trying to make a video on it for the channel to explore really how effective Harlequins could be in 10th edition without, their old rules, essentially, right? Because we all know that they lost a lot in 10th edition. And I found that Harlequins can still be quite effective unless they're against something with towering. So unless you're going against something like Imperial or Chaos Knights, they can just blow you off the table turn 1 or 2. They can actually be pretty effective as an army. Now, I ran my army without any other Eldar units except for Harlequins, because I wanted to stay in theme. I really wanted to see how good a pure Harlequin list could be. And I did run into some issues that I discussed in that video. If you're interested in knowing more about that video, go ahead and check out my channel page and you can look for it. But essentially, yeah, Harlequins are an army that doesn't seem great on paper because they did lose a lot. But what I did find is that opponents were having trouble dealing with Starweavers. I had 5 of them in the list, I believe, 4 or 5 of them, and then I had 3 Void Weavers. So I had quite a few vehicles. And my opponents always found it hard to kill them all because of that 4+ invul. Again, except if they were Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights, and then they just kind of gunned them off the board with, insane volume of fire. But since the September data slate, towering units can no longer ignore obscuring terrain, so, armies like this can actually do very well in those types of battles because they can just swarm all over the enemy, they can strike without warning, and oftentimes the Knight player might only have 1 or 2 good targets in any given turn, and if you're forcing your opponent to just kill 1 or 2 targets in, any battle round, then you're probably dominating the rest of the battlefield. Okay, on to the other data sheets of the list. So we do have a classic 2 Skyweavers, so I just want to mention these before I mention the Shroud Runners. Skyweavers are armed with Star Bolas, just basically because there's already so much combat in the army anyway. This is a really good unit for dealing with vehicles. But they're also not bad at clearing out just your basic 5-man Marine squad. So anything that, the troops can't really be bothered with, Skyweavers can do the job. And also, on average, they do about 6 mortal wounds to vehicles. So if the Star Weavers and all the Shuriken cannons can't kill a big target, then the Skyweavers certainly can take the rest of it out. And then we have the Shroud Runners. So the Shroud Runners are a linchpin unit in this list because this list really does need something to allow its anti-infantry weapons to hit harder against harder targets. So, having lethal hits with all of your shooting, and, that doesn't just mean the Shuriken cannons, although, they are the best with the Shuriken cannons. That also means your pistols, your fusion pistols, your Shuriken pistols, and also your Void Weavers, which we'll talk about in just a second. And this allows you to not only decimate infantry, but also punch extremely hard against larger targets. Now, the other cool thing about this is, a lot of people forget it might not be the best to use Fire and Fade on a unit of Shroud Runners in a normal Eldar list. But if you want multiple turns of hard-hitting firepower, it might be worth it to move these guys up, mark a target, then Fire and Fade back to safety, because you can do the same thing in the next turn and kill another hard target. So yeah, while it's only an 80-point unit, it is very important to keep alive if you need hard targets destroyed. And also, not for nothing, it is a good objective unit as well, right? It's very fast, can get to parts of the board very easily, and also has precision weapons, which are, again, decent at killing lightly armed characters, like Imperial Guard characters or characters like the Dark Commune. And of course, rounding out the list, we have 3 Void Weavers. Again, Void Weavers are extremely efficient vehicles. They have that 4+ invul save, so they're pretty tough against, single-shot high EP weapons. But they also have a great set of weaponry themselves. 2 Shuriken cannons, so they're essentially a Star Weaver. And on top of that, they have the Prismatic Cannon, which can do really solid damage against larger targets, right? It is strength 12. Yeah, it's only 4 damage. It's not hitting as hard as a Brightlands typically, but it still hits hard enough to put wounds on a target. And when you have tons of firepower from Shuriken cannons to back you up, having that little bit of extra damage maybe isn't that big of a deal. And not only that, but these guys have a dual role. They're also very good at killing infantry. 2d6 strength 4 attacks with Blast is nothing to laugh about, especially when combined with lethal hits. So if you go against a super tough army, you have tools to deal with those tough units. And if you go against a Horde army like Imperial Guard, you have the tools to deal with that as well. And by the way, I do think that the strongest way to run Imperial Guard right now is actually full-on infantry. So a lot of Eldar players struggle into Imperial Guard because of that exact reason. But this list really shows you that if you have enough anti-infantry weaponry, Imperial Guard are just really no match for you. Because yes, of course their units can be quite a bit tougher with things like take cover, but, with lethal hits, tons of shooting from Shuriken cannons, and tons of shooting from these Void Weavers with the prismatic cannons, you can easily mop up 2 infantry blobs per turn. And your Imperial Guard opponent can only bring back 1 of them, which means, one of those units is pretty much gone for the rest of the game. All right, and to wrap up the list, we have 5 Warp Spiders. Now, a lot of you guys might be questioning this unit because, Warp Spiders, although good, seem to be a little bit off in this list. because it has a lot of fast units already, and it has a lot of units that can, take out infantry. So why do you exactly have warp spiders? Well, quite frankly, warp spiders are good denial, right? Warp spiders have that brutal overwatch with devastating wounds. So something this list doesn't have is extremely powerful tools of denial. Yeah, you have Waaagh for anti-large, but you don't have anything that denies infantry really well or denies things like deep strikers. So yeah, you can screen and stuff. You can definitely screen deep strikers out, but there's that chance that your opponent has something like Inceptors, can deep strike within 3, and that's not really screenable. So what do you do against that? Well, warp spiders are there to help you out, either as a secondary objective scorer or as a denial unit for Overwatch purposes. So if your opponent wants to deep strike that Inceptor unit right next to your Death Jester or Illic Nightspear, your warp spiders will have something to say about it. And typically on average rolls, if you're able to kill at least one Inceptor, chances are those plasma guns are just not going to be enough with the Fate dice to kill a Death Jester or, in fact, to kill Illic Nightspear. So while this unit may not seem great with this list on paper, just as far as its damage goes, when you take into account its abilities and its ability to deny enemy units the chance to, deep strike close to your vulnerable lone operatives, this unit can absolutely be worth its weight in gold. And I absolutely think it's a perfect choice to wrap up this list. Alright, so what are my final thoughts on the list? So in this list, you have tons of 4+ invul target saturation, potentially with a -1 to hit as well via the smokescreen stratagem. Again, a little bit rare, but if your opponent's going hard for a certain target, you can definitely pop smoke and make them waste a lot more firepower trying to kill it. And it also has the killing power in a primarily vehicle and monster meta. So even though it's armed with, essentially a bunch of anti-infantry weapons, when you have Shroud Runners with them, that can turn those anti-infantry weapons into basically an anti-everything weapon, right? If you force enough armor saves on an opponent, they will fail them. It has huge combo potential again with the Shroud Runners to spike damage even further. So yeah, like I said before, you have really tough targets out there that, are probably pretty immune to things like shuriken cannons. But when you give your whole army lethal hits against it, all of a sudden that target is pretty vulnerable. And it's the same reason why Chaos Space Marines are so powerful into pretty much any other army, right? No matter what they bring, it's because they can get lethal hits on almost every single unit in their army with very little risk. And of course, the Harlequin list that Mike brought kind of is doing the same thing. Also, the innate weaknesses of the solo Quins is covered by the Warp Spiders, Shroud Runners, Waaagh, and Illic. So essentially what Mike did is he considered the weaknesses of the Harlequins, right? The troops, the Death Jester, the Star Weavers, and the Void Weavers, and he plugged those weaknesses with units from the Craftworld Eldar. We have Warp Spiders for air denial, Shroud Runners for extra damage, we have Waaagh for anti-large and also just stickiness, and we have Illic as a lone operative who can sit on an objective in the backfield. Okay, so I know what a lot of you guys are thinking right now. Well, this list did good, but does this really mean that Harlequins are back competitively? And I have to say, while I definitely think they have some play now since the nerfs to Towering, I don't think they are anywhere close to being able to stand on their own as an army. So yes, they can be good when fielded in large numbers by an experienced opponent, or experienced player, I should say. But they do have weaknesses that weren't apparent in last edition's rule set. So yeah, they still need a little bit of help. They still need support because there are things missing from their roster that they desperately need. Hopefully we'll get those things in the Codex or with the detachment. But it is important to note that this list performed quite well with the assistance of those units, those Craftworld units. So Waaagh, Shroud Runners, Illic, and Warp Spiders, all of which were key components in making the list work. And also, the whole list was basically Harlequins, if you think about it, right? A vast majority of the points were spent on Harlequins, and there was only maybe 400 points, maybe a little bit more than 400 points invested in support units that were outside of Quins. So I definitely think that an army that has a vast majority of it being Harlequins can be successful on the battlefield, and I think Mike has all shown us that. So in conclusion, well played to Mike Porter for his excellent performance with the Quins, and proving a lot of people out there wrong about their competitive viability as an army. Of course, with some Craftworld support. I truly love how the meta is evolving as well, and I think that's something that I've talked a lot about on this channel. But seeing all the different Eldar lists winning tournaments now that the Wraith Knight has been nerfed has really just been an awesome thing to see. I just absolutely love seeing all these diverse lists actually be very successful in competitive play, and I really think it kind of is one of the most beautiful moments in Eldar competitive history that I've ever seen. And before I start getting sentimental about that, when I was playing back in 5th edition competitively in tournaments and things, I have to say, it was a much different vision. And I think just as far as balance, whether it be internal balance or external balance, I think the game has made massive steps towards the right direction. And actually are very close to being perfectly balanced. A lot of people out there might say, well, Eldar 58% win rate, that's OP, that's not balanced, they're OP. And Dark Eldar 44% or 43%, they're super bad. But really, if you guys had played back in the day when I was playing, you guys would know what OP really is. And you guys would also be aware of what being underpowered means. Ask NID players in 5th edition how they felt about, playing competitively in that time. So, by the way, anybody watching this video who played NIDs in 5th edition, please leave a comment and tell everybody how bad they truly were, right? And really how hard it was to win as a NIDs player, whether casually or competitively. It was just super difficult in that time period. And now we have armies that all really kind of stand a chance at winning competitively, which is awesome. It's awesome to see, and I'm really excited to see what this data slate brings. I know we're probably going to get a few nerfs, but that's okay. I think a few nerfs on some units are warranted, like Night Spinners and stuff like that. Let's be real here. But I am excited to see what that brings out in the Eldar community, because as you guys know, the Eldar community is one of the most creative in all of 40K. So that's where we're going to end today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials on my Patreon activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategy, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description. And also just keep in mind that I am quite active on our channel's Discord, so if you want to ask me any questions, definitely sign up. It's totally free. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on my channel store page, or you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon through the affiliate links below, go ahead and check out those links. I will leave them in the description as well. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and finally, Quins get a victory. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.